On July 8, 1912, a woman signed her entire fortune over to her husband. The next day, he bought a bathtub. 4 days later, she was dead inside it. The coroner called it an accident. Then it happened again and again. 3 brides, 3 baths, 3 different towns, not a single bruise on any body. What connected these deaths was one man, and a system he never expected anyone to uncover. George Joseph Smith entered the world in Bethnal Green, London, on January 11, 1872. His early years were marked by instability and petty crime. At just 9, he was sent to a reformatory, an industrial school meant to straighten out wayward children. Juvenile court records from the era list him for truancy, theft, and disorderly conduct, a pattern that would shadow him into adulthood. By his teens, Smith was already cycling between workhouses and police courts, building a reputation for minor fraud and theft. Physical descriptions from police files paint an unremarkable man, of average height, pale, and soft-spoken. But witnesses later recalled his unsettling charm, a persuasive calm that seemed to draw women in. Behind that quiet exterior, Smith was already practicing deception on a small scale, learning how to slip through the cracks of Victorian society. From 1908 onward, Smith's tactics grew more ambitious. He began moving from town to town under a string of false names. 4 aliases are documented in civil registers and police notebooks: George Love, Henry Williams, John Lloyd, and Charles Oliver James. Each new identity allowed him to shed his past and start fresh, with no one the wiser. Marriage registers across England show at least 7 bigamous unions, each one entered into while a previous wife was still alive. He would charm, propose, and marry, sometimes within weeks, before vanishing with whatever money or valuables he could extract. The records from Bethnal Green, Bristol, Blackpool, Herne Bay, and Bath all carry his false signatures. Each name and each address was a shield, masking the web of marriages and financial schemes that trailed behind him. By the time Smith stood in a registry office with his next bride, the authorities had no inkling of the pattern forming beneath the surface, a pattern that would soon turn deadly. Beatrice Mundy, known as Bessie, arrived in Herne Bay in the summer of 1912 with her new husband. On the surface, it was an ordinary marriage, but within weeks, a paper trail began to form. On July 8th, Bessie signed a will at a local solicitor's office, leaving £2,579 to her husband, an amount that would have set her up for life had she lived. The very next day, a receipt from Herne Bay ironmongers shows a purchase: a cast-iron freestanding bathtub 5 feet long, 150 pounds in weight, delivered to their address. The invoice dated July 9th lists the buyer as G.J. Smith. 4 days later, on July 13th, the calm of their rented house was shattered. Smith rushed to the police station and sent a telegram that said, "Come at once. My wife is dead." The message was stark, with no mention of accident or illness. When the authorities arrived, they found Bessie face down in the new tub, water still warm. The coroner's report noted no external injuries and lungs heavy with water, findings consistent with drowning, not violence. The landlady, Mrs. Ellen Crossley, told the inquest she had heard a splash and saw Smith standing by the bathroom door. Smith claimed Bessie must have slipped while trying to get out. The verdict was accidental death. No suspicion attached to the husband, no hint of foul play. The will was probated and the money transferred. Only the sequence of events, the will, the tub, the sudden death, remained quietly recorded in official files, waiting to be noticed. Alice Burnham's wedding took place in Blackpool in late November 1913. She was 25, a nurse with modest savings, and believed she had found security in her new husband, who introduced himself as John Miller. Within days of the ceremony, Alice signed a will leaving £1,850 to her husband and took out a £500 life insurance policy. The policy, issued on December 12th, named her new spouse as the sole beneficiary. The ink was barely dry before Smith began asking pointed questions about the boarding house bathroom. Landlord Joseph Crossley later remembered Smith's curiosity about the tub, its length, its depth, and how quickly water could be drawn. Crossley remembered that Smith had been eating heartily the morning after Mrs. Burnham's death. On December 12th, Alice was found lifeless in the bath. Smith claimed she had fainted while bathing. The coroner's report listed no bruises, No signs of violence, only waterlogged lungs and a body found slumped forward. Smith insisted he had simply stepped out for a moment and returned to tragedy. The verdict was accidental death. Yet the pattern was becoming harder to dismiss. The speed with which Smith arranged for the insurance claim, filed within 48 hours, stood out in the police docket. Crossley's testimony about Smith's calm demeanor and appetite the next morning unsettled everyone who heard it. When questioned about the bathroom, Smith had even measured the tub himself, supposedly to ensure his wife's comfort. Each detail, innocent in isolation, began to stack up. The same sequence: whirlwind courtship, a new will, insurance, and of sudden drowning in a rented tub. Coincidence was losing ground to suspicion. Margaret Lofty's story begins in Bath on December 17, 1914. She married a man calling himself John Lloyd. The next day she signed a will and a life insurance policy, both naming her new husband as sole beneficiary. £700 promised if anything happened to her. That evening, Smith told the landlady he was going out to buy tomatoes. When he returned, Margaret was dead in the bath. The inquest found no bruises, no struggle, only a body face down in the water. Another accidental drowning, or so it seemed. But the details unsettled those left behind. The £700 policy. The will signed just hours before her death. The husband's absence for a simple errand. Margaret had no history of illness. The tragedy reached the newspapers, but this time something changed. Alice Burnham's father, Charles, spotted the report and recognized the pattern. He clipped the article and mailed it to Scotland Yard, writing, "The same method, the same man. Please investigate." Meanwhile, Joseph Crossley, landlord of the Blackpool boarding house where Alice Burnham died, sent his own letter. He described Smith's obsession with the bathroom and added a detail that stuck. He said Smith was eating heartily the morning after Mrs. Burnham's death. Both letters landed on the desk of Detective Inspector Arthur Neal. The names, the methods, the financial arrangements. Suddenly, 3 deaths in 3 bathtubs did not look like accidents. Neal compared the case and found the same man moving from town to town, always with a different name, always with money at stake. In February 1915, as Smith tried to claim Margaret Lofty's estate, Neal served the arrest warrant. The pattern was exposed. The case was no longer a private tragedy. It was a public scandal. Sir Bernard Spilsbury stood over the cast-iron tub, notebook in hand, while the courtroom waited. The method was simple but chilling. A policewoman volunteered to take the victim's place, settling into the cramped bath 5 feet long, the water just deep enough to cover her face. Spilsbury demonstrated his theory. A sudden grab at the ankles and a sharp upward jerk. Within seconds, the volunteer lost consciousness and slipped under the water in eerie silence. She was pulled out and revived, but the effect was undeniable. The experiment showed how a healthy woman could be drowned in a shallow tub without struggle or noise and leave no marks. Jurors watched as Spilsbury explained the rapid loss of consciousness, the precise tub dimensions, and the absence of external injuries. The old story of accident could no longer stand. The science spoke for itself. Mr. Justice Marsh presided as the Old Bailey courtroom filled with the physical evidence. 3 bathtubs, 3 sets of documents, and a single man in the dock. The judge's decision allowed the jury to hear detail from all 3 deaths, ruling that the pattern of marriages, wills, and drownings could not be separated. This was an extraordinary move, admitting similar facts evidence to show a deliberate system, not isolated accidents. 12 jurors listened as the prosecution laid out the sequence. Each woman married under a false name. Each signed over her estate. Each was found drowned within weeks. When the jury retired, their deliberation lasted only 22 minutes. The verdict was guilty. Smith received the death sentence. On August 13, 1915, at Maidstone Prison, the hangman carried out the sentence. The case set a new standard for English law, confirming that a pattern of calculated deaths could prove intent where violence left no mark. Evil rarely arrives with warning. In a world where trust is easily manipulated, Smith's cold calculation, his aliases, the insurance policies, and a bathtub forced the law to see pattern as proof. Today, forensic science still fights to catch what hides in plain sight. How many patterns remain invisible, waiting to be found?